You're watching France 24, the main headlines for you. Businesses shutting their doors in a general strike today as thousands of protesters are once again on the streets in Myanmar. The junta still failing to shut the demonstrations down as anger rises over another 2 deaths at the weekend. Allies of Russia's Vladimir Putin set to be hit by new European sanctions. That as foreign ministers meet to discuss how to respond to the treatment of Alexei Navalny. We'll hear from our correspondent in Brussels shortly. And Israel takes a step towards normalcy, reopening a raft of businesses and services from coronavirus pandemic lockdowns. Our correspondent Iris Makler reports from Jerusalem for us shortly. Welcome to you from the team. We're live from Paris here on France 24. I'm Stuart Norval. Coming up for you in business today, Boeing is calling on airlines worldwide to suspend the use of certain 777 jets after one of the planes suffered engine failure in the US state of Colorado over the weekend. We'll report on that. And the aim, well, to show a bit of colourful hope, really, that as Pakistan's Fashion Week winds to a close. Everyone is joining this, said one demonstrator. We need to come out and show support. That as businesses shut their doors across Myanmar today in a general strike called to oppose the military as thousands of people have gathered once again, despite a threat from the authorities that confrontation could cost lives. Anger's been rising over the weekend as 2 protesters were shot dead in the second city of Mandalay. 3 weeks, though, after seizing power, the junta there were evidently failing to stop the daily protests calling for the reversal of the coup and the release of their elected leader, Aung San Suu Kyi. Valerie de Camp has this report.
Tens of thousands of protesters pouring into the streets of Dawei in southern Myanmar, answering a call for a general strike issued by the country's civil disobedience movement to oppose the military coup. Businesses have shut down, thousands of people marching in 3 major cities across the country. This time, organizers say it could be the largest day of protests so far, many comparing the general strike to demonstrations in 1988, when a previous generation staged mass rallies against the military. In a statement read out on state television, the military warned protesters against action, threatening to use lethal force.
It is found that the protesters have raised their incitements towards rioting and an anarchy mob on the day of the 22nd of February. Protesters are now inciting the people, especially emotional teenagers and youths, to a confrontational path where they will suffer the loss of life.
A warning that comes after a deadly weekend. 2 people were killed when security officers fired at protesters in the city of Mandalay. Another man was shot dead in Yangon. This as people mourn the death of a young woman, the first confirmed fatality, who has become a symbol of the protest movement. But that has not discouraged protesters. The UN's envoy on human rights to Myanmar is urging restraint and warning that unlike 1988, the actions by security forces are being recorded.
Well, the junta and those associated with it really in the crosshairs of European Union foreign ministers as they're going to be meeting today. The ministers are discussing possible sanctions against those responsible for the coup in Myanmar. Others in the crosshairs, well, the closest allies of Russia's Vladimir Putin. Personal sanctions on the cards there as Europe looks to respond to the treatment of Alexei Navalny. Well, earlier I spoke to our correspondent Dave Keating in Brussels.
We're hearing that there is enough support to use the EU's new human rights sanction regime. It's only 3 months old. They adopted it in December, and it looks like they do have the unanimous support needed in order to adopt sanctions against individuals involved in the arrest of Alexei Navalny in Russia. This is very interesting because this new regime was difficult for the EU to pass. There were several member states who worried that it was unnecessarily antagonistic toward Russia in the first place, most notably because it's modeled on a U.S. law called the Magnitsky Act, which references a Russian dissident. That's actually why the EU law is not specifically given that name. The fact that it's being used so early and specifically against Russia when so many countries were worried that the optics here were going to unnecessarily antagonize Russia shows just how much the thinking has changed. And that's the result of a disastrous visit by the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs, Josep Borrell, to Moscow earlier this month, where he was effectively humiliated by the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov standing next to him, who was insulting the EU. And even while that press conference was taking place, Russia was expelling some European diplomats who had participated in protest against Navalny's arrest. That was a real game changer here. And it's hard to see what Moscow's intention was in humiliating the EU in that incident. But assuming that they didn't want more sanctions from the European Union, it appears that has backfired. It is hard to get unanimous approval for sanctions against Russia. There are EU sanctions against Russia already in place for the country's invasion and annexation of Crimea, and also there were sanctions put in place against individuals in October for this Navalny question. But the use of this new human rights sanctions regime is going to have Moscow worried. Now, this again targets individuals, not the country specifically, and again, it would be the start of a process that would need to be confirmed by prime ministers and presidents at a summit next month.
Dave Keating there in Brussels. Now, Israel has taken a step towards normalcy, reopening a raft of businesses and services from pandemic lockdowns. A steady flow, really, of data proving that the high vaccination rate there is working, with almost a third of the population already receiving the 2 recommended doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech coronavirus vaccine. It's the world's quickest inoculation pace per capita. Well, here's our correspondent in Jerusalem, Iris Makler.
We're at the YMCA, the most famous gym in Jerusalem, and it's reopened after 5 months of lockdown. People here say they were counting the days.
כולם באים עם מחמאות, עם אנרגיה. עד לי פה מגיעים כאילו עם חיוך גדול כזה שאפילו אני מזהה אותו מתחת למסכה.
I am so excited to be back. It's actually for me almost a year.
To get in, people have to show their new green passports. They can be on their phone or on a piece of paper as proof that they've been vaccinated or have recovered from COVID-19.
The green passport is a good idea because we can be safe. There is no corona in the studio.
That's why I'm here. I'm here because that's the rule. And I know they're very, very, very careful. And I know if that's the rule here, then I can come without worrying.
More than 4 million Israelis have received their first dose of the vaccine. That's almost half the population. But vaccine numbers are declining and the Israeli government is worried. It's not about supply. Israel has all the vaccine it needs. It's about hesitation. And Israel is hoping that this green passport, part carrot, part stick, will encourage people to be vaccinated, especially the young.
Well, meanwhile, around 20,000 doses of the Russian Sputnik vaccine have arrived in Gaza. Now, the territory is home of 2 million people. It's registered, though, more than 54,000 cases of COVID-19, with 543 deaths. Fraser Jackson reports.
A truck carrying 20,000 doses of coronavirus vaccine arrives in southern Gaza from the United Arab Emirates. The donation kickstarts Gaza's vaccination campaign, which gets underway a few weeks after vaccinations started in the West Bank. But it's also politically embarrassing for Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas ahead of elections in May, as the transfer was secured by a rival now exiled in Abu Dhabi, Mohammed Dahlan.
هذه الدفعة جاءت بتبرع سخي من دولة الإمارات العربية الشقيقة وجاءت نتيجة الجهود التي بذلها النائب محمد دحلان من أجل التخفيف عن معاناة أبناء الشعب الفلسطيني.
Gaza received its first shipments of vaccine last Wednesday after a previously planned transfer was blocked at an Israeli checkpoint. It now has enough jabs to inoculate 11,000 people, just a fraction of its population of 2 million. Israel has maintained a strict blockade on Gaza since Hamas seized power in 2007. It's faced international criticism for largely excluding Palestinians in Gaza and the occupied West Bank from its vaccination campaign, one of the most successful in the world. Earlier this month, Israel agreed to transfer 5,000 Moderna doses to medical workers in the West Bank.
Now some more world news, and 7 poll workers killed during the presidential vote in Niger as their vehicle hit a landmine, the incident marring the country's first democratic transition of power, which otherwise, though, passed off peacefully. The ruling party candidate Mohamed Bazoum expected to triumph as he won over 39% in the first round and also secured the endorsements of the candidates who came third and fourth. In early counting, he's pulling ahead with over 54% of the vote. Hundreds of Haitians have taken to the streets of Port-au-Prince in Haiti to demand an end to President Jovenel Moïse's term in office as a constitutional crisis there continues to escalate. The opposition continuing to say he should step down as his 5-year term in office expired following elections in 2015. Moïse rejects those claims, saying he took power in 2017 after winning fresh elections in 2016. He says he will, though, stand down next year. And protests in support of a rapper who's been jailed for lyrics that insulted the Spanish monarchy, along with his tweets, have turned violent for a 6th consecutive night in Barcelona. Clashes between police and groups of mostly angry youths. The police moving in after half an hour of being pelted by rocks, bottles and firecrackers. 7 more people arrested, bringing the total detained to over 100. The Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune has announced a highly anticipated but observers say ultimately limited government reshuffle. It came on the eve of what is today the 2nd anniversary of a protest movement that's regaining momentum. The under-fire Prime and Justice Ministers keeping their posts. The President also signing a presidential decree dissolving the National Assembly. It means that elections there should be held within 3 months. Nadia Massi explains.
2 years ago, the streets of Algeria looked like this. It was the beginning of the Hirak protest movement that peacefully forced President Abdelaziz Bouteflika from power. These days, Algiers is much quieter, thanks in part to coronavirus. But much of the frustration that drew hundreds of thousands of people out to demonstrate hasn't gone away.
تعرفون جيدا واقع العملية السياسية كيف هي مغلقة. كل هذا يخلينا في خنق حقيقي للحقوق السياسية، للحقوق المدنية، للحقوق الاجتماعية. قرارات ليدر رشيد الرئيس غير راضي بها الشعب الجزائري. الشعب الجزائري يحوس على نظام حر، دولة مستقلة.
In a nod to the demands of the Hirak, President Abdelmajid Tebboune carried out a limited reshuffle on Sunday. But several politicians accused of leading a crackdown on protesters remain in place. The government has also released dozens of political prisoners. For many Algerians, though, these are piecemeal changes, and their core demands to flush out corruption, nepotism and limit the role of the army remain unheard. Speaking to France 24 this weekend, the country's foreign minister called on protesters to stay off the streets and instead express their frustration through the ballot box.
Le droit de manifester est un droit constitutionnel, mais nous vivons des circonstances exceptionnelles qui sont dues au Covid-19. Si les gens veulent changer les choses, ils ont une merveilleuse opportunité, c'est de s'engager dans le processus politique qui a été décidé par le président de la République avec la dissolution de la Chambre basse.
The date for those elections has not been announced, and Hirak protesters don't expect them to yield real change, but instead simply yet another rejig among Algeria's political elite.
Now then, the aim, well, to show a bit of colourful hope. That's what the designers hoped anyway. With this is the close of Fashion Week in Pakistan, with pretty flamboyant designs reflecting the bright side of Pakistan society. The fashion industry there is really suffering during the COVID-19 pandemic, and those exhibiting say they really wanted to show some happy moments in their collections, which I think you can see from those that they've managed to achieve. One designer saying, after a 1-year break, people are finally getting back into fashion, and that it is a beautiful thing. Makes a change to see those catwalks back up and running in Pakistan.